Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of council. If I can figure out how to make this thing go up. It goes down. Oh, there it is. The up arrow is worn out, needs replacement. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the second motion on the order paper before you, and that is the question of whether or not there should be a restrictive covenant placed on this property. And I speak as a representative of the Vancouver Not Vegas Coalition, and I am strongly in favor of the imposition, or the, if you like, the attachment of a restrictive covenant to the title. I'd like to address this question, which was commented upon in the press this morning, has been the subject of discussion here this afternoon, about whether or not the restrictive covenant is redundant. And in my view, I'm going to try to persuade you that it's not redundant. The starting point in all of this is the Mayor and Council statement that there will be no expanded gambling in the City of Vancouver. Dropping back to April of 2011, when this mess first all arose, the applicant came forward seeking approval for 110,000 space, or 110 to 114,000, but in that range of square feet of space, in order to construct a casino that would contain 1,500 slot machines and either 300 or 600 gambling tables. I can't remember what the number of tables was. The important point is the number of slot machines in 110,000 feet. Then the next piece in the puzzle was the mayor saying there will be no expansion of gambling on this council's watch. The next piece was the introduction of a bylaw, which I can only say as an outsider looking in, seems to me to contain an absolutely positively glaring inconsistency, which was either deliberate or negligent. And the inconsistency is this. It authorizes gaming space at the BC Place relocated Edgewater of 10,600 square meters, which is about 110,000 or somewhat in excess of 110,000 square feet. That's what the body of the bylaw says. And then at the end of the bylaw, there are a bunch of conditions attached. And one of the conditions is that in this space there shall not be more than 600 slot machines and 75 gaming tables. I don't purport to be any kind of an expert at all in relation to zoning bylaws, but I did ask a question, whether or not it would be open to council without a public hearing to amend that condition so as to increase the number of slots and the number of tables, and I was told that that could be done without a public hearing. If it were to be done in the face of a public hearing, that would be one thing. To contemplate it without a public hearing is quite another. Now, I may be in error of that, but that was the information I received at the time. So fast forward to December of 2013. Along comes Paragon asking for a development permit which will permit them to build 72,000 square feet of space to accommodate 600 slot machines and 75 gaming tables. That 72,000, if the math is right, is about 75% or 70% of the maximum that's been authorized by the bylaw, which Paragon itself said was adequate to accommodate 1,500 slot machines and 300 or 600 gaming tables. So I ask, what's going on here? The difficulty with all of this is that one piece of the bylaw is clearly expansionary. You've got a casino now that's operating quite nicely at a profit at 32,000 square feet of space. You've got an organization that's coming forward and saying, oh, we need 72,000, even though we could have put in 2.5 times as many slot machines in slightly more space. And on the other side of it, you've got the constrictive approach, which is no more than 600 slots and 75 gaming tables. Why is somebody like me concerned about this? Well, it's a very simple answer. If, as an example, Hastings closes and those slots are shut down, the question would be, without expanding gambling in the City of Vancouver, those slot machines could be moved to this additional space that's being requested by Paragon at the BC Place site. And so the concern that I have, and I know it's shared by countless others, is that somebody here is trying to do an end run around what have been the expressed intentions of council and the expressed intentions of the community during that lengthy public hearing process, and the assurances that were granted by or given by the mayor and this council back in April of 2011. And so, I don't like coming down here, although I must say it's been interesting to see you all at work, and it's been an interesting experience for me as an outsider looking in to see what you do from day to day. I admire municipal politicians. To me, it's the most important level of government, and it's far more important than provincial and federal, but that's neither here nor there at this point. I've enjoyed looking in at this, but I don't want to come here anymore, quite frankly. So I would like you to please do this. Put the restrictive covenant, you're probably tired of my voice, please put the restrictive covenant on the title and get us out of here. Because the restrictive covenant authorized by bylaw, authorized by council, required of the owner, agreed to the owner by the owner, is going to restrict the use of the property just the same as other restrictive covenants validly imposed by owners and others have done, whether it's here or in relation to the Nature Trust of British Columbia putting covenants against development on properties with the agreement of the owner in the Okanagan or on the Fraser River or elsewhere. You can do it. I'm not here to tell you how to do it, but you can most assuredly do it. And it will get around this constant debate that we have.
You're out of time, Mr. Pittfield, but there are questions for you. I just have to.
Thank you. 10-6 on one side, this limitation on the other.
Okay, you're a minute over, but Councillor Carr has a question for you. Sorry, Councillor Carr, there we go.
I see I'm on now. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to watch us all in action and be patient.
And educational.
My first question is around the statement that you made, that you asked the question, could council increase the number of slot machines and gaming tables without a public hearing? And we're told yes. When did you ask that question and of whom?
I can't tell you of whom I asked it because I quite frankly don't recall. I don't think it was a question directed to anybody at city staff. I wouldn't suggest that at all. It was a question that I directed to somebody who, to my mind, had some knowledge in the municipal planning and development area, but as to a name, I can't provide it to you. When the question was asked, I asked the question late in the fall of 2013 after the development permit application came into the public domain.
Okay. Do you?
And I still don't know the answer to the question from what has been said today.
I'll ask it again. We did receive an answer to that question or a statement earlier by Mr. Jackson, the director of planning, or manager of planning. But I will ask him again to see,
But I'm still unclear whether it's something council can do or whether it requires a public hearing.
Right. Okay. No, I'll simply get more clarification on that. You've raised a very interesting scenario: the closure of Hastings Racecourse, gambling, and the movement of those gaming tables or slot machines into this space. I'll ask that question as well of staff, if that can happen and how that could happen, or without necessarily, as you say, increasing the gambling in Vancouver, because they're both in Vancouver. So, can you speak at all to the issue of the impacts of increasing the number of gaming tables and slot machines in the downtown core, in one larger facility, which it is larger in space, but then larger in terms of gambling? I mean, what were the arguments? You must have been at the hearings early on. What were the arguments waged against having what Paragon first said they wanted, which was 1,500 slots and 300 to 600 gaming tables?
Well, the hearing went on for several days with people talking on both sides of the issue. But it strikes me that the major objections to gambling are, number one, the element of addiction. And the statistics then were, and I don't think that they've changed, that approximately 8% of the gambling population across the country, this isn't just British Columbia, but it's across the country, falls into what is classified as addicted gamblers. And the information and the studies that have been done in Alberta and Ontario indicate that 8% contributes to somewhere in the range of 35 to 45% of the gaming revenue. Addiction is a huge problem. At the time, it had led to what was thought to be a murder-suicide in Richmond shortly before those hearings began in April. There were stories told by addicted gamblers and families thereof about the impact that addicted gambling had on families. There is then another whole aspect of it, which is that BC Place is supposed to be a family venue. It's there with the Whitecaps, it's there with football, it's there with rock concerts, it's there with everything else. And here you're going to have a gambling venue immediately adjacent to BC Place. It was one thing if you had to walk across the street to Edgewater, but here you'd be able to walk out of BC Place immediately into the gaming space. It didn't seem that from a city perspective where families are important and where everything you're doing in this council is trying to enhance family and general living and the quality of living in the province, that made any sense. There were other avenues. There's the question of criminality, which also enters into, I believe it's a condition in the development permit. There is the question of loan sharking. And all the harm that brings. There's the question of money laundering and all the harm that brings, all of which are criminal offenses, and all of which, by condoning gambling and the existence of casinos, perfectly lawfully, they become the homes, if you like, for those kinds of illegal and criminal activities. So when you stack all that up against and you say, well, what's the good of it? Well, the good of it is that to bring people to the city. How many? The numbers were questioned. The assumptions are questioned, and Ms. Garacino has pointed to the fact that in many other centres, these things are falling apart.
Mr. Pittfield, thank you very much.
I do have a question for you myself, or two. You were attending, I think as I recall, you did come to those hearings and you watched them quite closely. You were a close observer of the hearings. You said that either there was, in this end run scenario, either negligence or incompetence, I guess, were the two kind of options, or a deliberate attempt to mislead. I just want to propose to you a third option, which was that there were two decisions being made, as I think you may recall. One is the built form zoning decision, and the second was the regulation of the number of slot machines. Those were the two decisions that council was confronted with, right? Do you recall that?
Well, yeah, I don't know which drove which. The opposition was to the numbers. Otherwise, you could have done anything you wanted with space. But
our regulatory authority is the number of slot machines.
Yes.
Okay. So the square footage connection is one that's been drawn later, but the square footage, as I recall, refers to the amount that was applied for on the expanded format. And council rejected expansion by limiting the number of slot machines. It may have been sloppy to go back, but I suggest to you it was not incompetent or corrupt.
Well, I didn't suggest it was corrupt. I said it was deliberate. It was either deliberate or negligent, because what you have is an expansionist provision in the bylaw coupled with a constrictive or constraining provision in the bylaw. So which prevails, and what's really going on here?
Isn't it the case that the number of slot machines is very absolute? We now have an applicant applying at 70% by your calculation of the total permissible area and for the number of slot machines. What's missing in that equation? I mean, they've aligned this. Maybe you're not satisfied that they are being candid about what the size requirements are, but the city's regulatory authority is the number of slot machines and tables, not the square footage per table. You follow what I'm saying?
I don't think that the city, the gaming control branch is the one that's going to decide how many slot machines slot machines are going to be licensed. The municipality obviously has a role in that under the Gaming Control Act, but I don't know that the city has said that it will not zone the property to permit more of those. But the question is whether or not that condition that is imposed is a malleable condition, or whether.
Well, fair enough. But I'd invite you to go back and review the city's authority, because the advice I've had is that it's the number of slot machines, the number of tables, not the square footage per or anything like that. I just want to turn to.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the.
Well, I think the source of concern that Ms. Garacino pointed to, I thought you were, was that the square footage seemed too much. It was out of whack with the number of slot machines, suggesting there was some hidden agenda here to later expand. That's what I've taken from the comments. And what I've said to you is that contradiction may not be nefarious. It may simply reflect the fact that council fixed the number of slot machines at far below the application, but didn't go back in the same hearing, which was parallel to deal with the square footage.
Well, then my response to that would be, why not fix this so that, as we've suggested before, and people say, well, we can't go back and amend the bylaw, why don't we fix this in some way, shape, or form so that the number of slots and the number of gaming tables, which was paramount, becomes paramount in the zoning bylaw, which it is not now.
Well, the advice we have is that we've made a very clear decision in that regard. It may be warranted or not warranted or make no difference to add a covenant, but that we did fix that quite well. I guess the only other question I had was, were you following the election closely and the commitments the mayor made at the time about the about expansion? It was a keystone announcement that he made.
I was here. I was here the Sunday afternoon that the resolution was.
I'm talking about in the election campaign. You referenced the mayor's specific commitment to oppose gaming expansion in his second term, this term.
I'm aware certainly that that's his position.
And in answer to a direct question, he said, and you can check this out, that he interpreted that as no transfer. And I was canvassed at the time, that there would be, that the slot machines at Hastings Park would not be transferable. That's his view of the zoning. So you weren't aware of that commitment at the time.
If that one did, it went by me.
Okay.
People move on. Zoning bylaws tend to live for a long period of time.
Yes, and this one says exactly how many slot machines. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Catherine Well.